The most technically challenging thing I've had in my 24 years has been color on cheese powders, like a mac and cheese. The other thing that's interesting that you mentioned about Kraft mac and cheese is they actually use yellow 5 and yellow 6, right? Artificial certified colors for the mac and cheeses. They actually swapped that to natural colors, but they didn't tell anyone. Like I'm sure they labeled it, right? But they didn't publicize it at all, and they ran for months. And then their advertising campaign was, "Hey, we switched to natural colors and no one noticed." And how brilliant is that? Because if they would have said, "Hey, we're now with new natural colors," people would say, "Oh, this tastes different." Like a
Yeah.
lot of it's psychological. They say, "Oh, they changed it. It's not as good as it used to be with yellow 5 and 6."
Hi, folks. I'm Mark. I'm a scientist, and if you don't know me, I make YouTube videos mostly about science and weight loss kind of topics. And I'm really excited to be joined today by someone who I've followed for a couple of years. Bame1 is his content creator name, who's been making mostly gaming content actually for the past several years, and I followed him for the last couple. I've been a big fan, but along the process of learning about the Bame lore, I learned that he is actually in his real life a food scientist, which is very cool and sort of tangentially related to some of the stuff that I do. But I'm really interested to talk to you about about that. Just about how you got into food science, what you've learned along the way, and I think there's probably a lot to it that people would benefit from knowing that maybe they're not super familiar with. And so, yeah, Bame, thanks for joining me and agreeing to talk to me about this.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You've been hanging out for a long time. Recognize you whenever you come in. You're a very interesting person when you chat, and very proud of you for your YouTube channel. Like you're getting some good views, man. Like I can't crack the code on YouTube at all. I can get good on all the others, but not that one. So proud of
Yeah.
you, and I think you've got really good scientific content too. So I'm happy I can add to a little bit more, and it should be fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I would venture to say I haven't cracked any codes yet, but at this point, for me, what's really important is to make things that I'm proud of and that I stand by. And yeah, just get it out there, and hopefully, it'll find its audience. But um, I'd love to learn more about you. So you have decades of experience in food science, is my understanding. So tell me about that. Like, what drew you to food science in the first place, and then how has your career progressed over this period of time?
Sure, good question. So high school was kind of easy for me, right? So going to college, I went to University of Wisconsin at Madison, go Badgers. Had a great time there. Started out at chemical engineering actually. And first semester was good, second semester bad, third semester was on academic probation. So basically, there were only two majors that would get me out of college within 5 years. It was microbiology and food science. My dad owned a restaurant, so I picked food science. Like literally, that's all there was to it.
I don't
It
know
would
if you
get
know
me
this, but
out.
I was a micro major. So
Oh, really?
we
Okay,
we picked
nice.
different branches. I started biochem and then ended up going into micro. So we went
Uh,
different paths in that way.
See, you could have been a food scientist,
I
man.
could have been, but
Nice.
I could have been. I missed the boat.
Yeah, but it worked out really good for me. I actually made the dean's list in studying food science, so kind of like turned it all out from not getting kicked out of college from the narrowest of degrees to doing all right as a food scientist. And then for my career, I graduated around in the early 2000s, and I've actually worked for the same company for 24 years now, right? So who does that these days, right?
Nobody.
So I started out actually as a production supervisor at one of our plants, one of our factories up in Wisconsin, and a lot going on in the plant. They had some spray dryers. They also did some like dry blending for like think of seasonings. They also made like sauces, and they could make like dairy flavors also. So there's actually a lot going on in the plant. And then I did that for 4.5 years, and then I got really good at formulating spray dried items, which sounds kind of weird, right? How does one get good at that? But hey, I had a good mentor at the start, and did that for some of our other plants, and then just did more and more progressively, like more to like took on more responsibilities and looked at a lot of like kind of optimization, right? Both process and recipes. And now I do that for all of North America in a $1 billion+ revenue company per year. So it's been a good road, man. I like it.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So let's rewind. I want to dig into some of the details and make this will be a little technical, a little bit nerdy, but I'm okay with that. So
Yeah.
let's talk about spray drying. What are you using it for?
We do a lot with like cheese powder. So if you think something you might sprinkle on a potato chip, right? Or that comes on a potato chip, or else like maybe mac and cheese, right? Those are kind of two different like particle types that you can make on a spray dryer, or you can make like a creamer, like non-dairy creamers for coffee. Those are probably the main ones I would say. There's some other kind of functional things you can do too, but we don't do too much of that.
So let's say, just give an example here. So let's say you're talking about spray drying powder for mac and cheese, right? Like
Mhm.
cheese powder. What's the starting point for that? Like, is it
Yeah,
fully
good
real
question. I never,
cheese that you're turning into the powder?
for sure. Yeah, you can start with real cheese, although cheese is kind of expensive, right?
Yeah.
So you could have a high cheese formula, but you got to pay for that, right? But if you want that same mouthfeel or texture, you could maybe replace some of the cheese with maybe like some vegetable fat or even dairy fat, right? Butter, and you could add some other maybe some carbohydrates like whey powder, for instance, or whey would
Mm,
be in a lot of those, or like maybe a maltodextrin, like a corn non-sucrose sweetener, could be in there. And then of course you'll add some other flavorings, probably some color. It's kind of up to whatever the customer wants on their label and what they're willing to pay for, right?
mhm. Yeah. So when you're thinking about these kinds of formulations, you mentioned a few things that it sounds like you're thinking about. You're thinking about color, you're thinking about nutrition, cost. How do you optimize on those sorts of things? And is it does it depend on the use case?
For sure. Yeah. It depends on all that. Also depends on weather. Would you believe that? So if it's like July and it's humid outside, the spray dryer is actually less efficient
Mm,
because the incoming air has more moisture in it versus in the middle of winter in Wisconsin, at least, the air is basically bone dry, right? So when you heat it up, it has a lot of moisture capacity that it can remove from the slurry of the cheese slurry.
on the back end, so you're getting a powder, and like the example we're using here is like a cheese powder. I'm thinking about this because I make like Kraft mac and cheese and stuff, and it's
Yeah, for
like
sure.
I'm used to that powder, and um, I'm interested when you're talking about like color and some of the like visual and mouthfeel properties of it because I remember the first time like I remember in the old days when I was growing up, Kraft mac and cheese would have like a yellow tint to it. The powder cheese powder would have a yellow tint to it, and then you make it, and it's normal. But at some point in time, I bought an off-brand mac and cheese from like Kroger that the powder was white, right? And that freaked me out. I was like, something's wrong here. But then when I made it, actually cooked it, it like turned back to the normal yellow. And so it got me thinking about what's actually happening here. So when you're on the other side of that, so what are you guys thinking about when you're making products like that? How are you thinking about optimizing color and those properties? I guess the specific question here is like, how do you know what's the North Star? Like, how do you know you're getting better?
Now, when you're commercializing a product for the first time, they'll probably have a set color, or maybe you'll make a couple different examples and say, "Hey, here's 5 examples. Which one do you like the best?" And they might say, "Oh, that one's perfect." Or maybe say, "Oh, I want this one, but I want a little bit more red."
Mm,
Right? The most technically challenging thing I've had in my 24 years has been color on cheese powders, like a mac and cheese. So the other thing that's interesting that you mentioned about Kraft mac and cheese is they actually use yellow 5 and yellow 6, right? Artificial certified colors for the mac and cheeses. They actually swapped that to natural colors, but they didn't tell anyone. Like I'm sure they labeled it, right? But they didn't publicize it at all, and they ran for months. And then their advertising campaign was, "Hey, we switched to natural colors and no one noticed." And how brilliant is that? Because if they would have said, "Hey, we're now with new natural colors," people would say, "Oh, this tastes different." Like it's a
yeah.
lot of it's psychological. They say, "Oh, they changed it. It's not as good as it used to be with yellow 5 and 6," right?
Yeah.
Actually, that change was very intense for them. They had a lot of effort goes into that, and it's hard to do. Yellow 6 and turmeric are pretty much you can swap those out really easily, but getting the red part of a cheese powder is actually very, very difficult in a spray dried environment.
This is a very stupid question. Why is that difficult?
Great question. So if you're making okay, just think of like a big barrel of cheddar cheese, right?
Mhm,
They add an annatto color to that to make it yellow, right? Some people don't even realize that. Annatto is actually really susceptible to pH. It's like you got to keep pH steady and you have
mhm,
to be, it's color sensitive and it's also heat sensitive, right? But if you're making a block of cheese, the pH is super controlled. Now, on the other side, though, if you're spray drying, the pH actually varies quite a bit between the liquid slurry and the powder. I don't know why, but it does about zero
mm,
point 0.4 pH. And it's also really freaking hot, right? Like the
mm.
powder might get up to the dryer is probably maybe 300 degrees Fahrenheit, perhaps, right?
Okay.
So very tough conditions for an auto color, but that's probably the most natural color way of cheddar cheese that people probably think of if they even know it exists.
It seems like there are so many aspects to it that as like me just a schmuck buying mac and cheese at the grocery store, like I'm not going to think about. But I'm interested in the organoleptic properties, right?
Yeah.
How
Uh,
how do you measure it is what I'm wondering. Like, do you have like panels of taste testers, or is it like a manager at the plant who takes a little bit and goes like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so for probably the best practice for sensory would be, so let's assume you make this, a couple times a year, right? So you would have like a gold standard, right? You'd probably have at least 5 people tasting the production run, maybe a couple samples per lot. Like a lot would be maybe a day's worth of product. So maybe like, I don't know, every 8 hours they taste it and they taste it versus a control and they say, yeah, this looks good. Or if you're even doing a more rigorous test, you would have maybe a second. So you'd have maybe 4 samples to taste, right? Versus you'll have a control, right? And then you'll have like the test of the day, maybe another gold standard, maybe one that's been kicked out for rework before, and then maybe one other one. And then they got to say, okay, out of all these 4 samples, which one's good, which one's not.
Oh, are they blinded?
So yeah, yep, they just have numbers on them. So like your good panelists will pick out the blind control, they'll pick out the one that's been reworked, and then the two tests, you would trust their judgment on that, right? Because they picked out the good one and then the bad one. But some
Yeah.
people will just, they're all garbage. Well, no, one of them is actually a blind control, right? That's
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, finding panelists is really difficult. And there's a lot, there's a whole lot going on in sensory
Are these
too.
people who like that's their job is to do sensory testing?
Usually at the factory, it'll be people in the lab, production supervisors, some operators. They'd probably pick out the ones that are pretty decent at it because some people are terrible at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this would be something like it's not their full-time job. It's like, but this is like an extra thing, responsibility they come in and do.
Yeah, and they're trained also.
Hmm.
You train your sensory panelists, and when you have when you have trained sensory panelists, you need less of them, right? And there's all statistics around like how many people do I need to prove that this is a good product.
Yeah. It makes me think of the Pepsi challenge. And
For sure.
I heard something recently, and I don't have a citation here, so you can tell me if I'm an idiot and this is wrong. But um, so the thing with the Pepsi challenge is when people are blind testing Pepsi versus Coke, oftentimes they choose Pepsi, and the reasoning is because it's sweeter. And what I've heard recently is that that is true, but it's only true of the first few like sips, and then after a period of time, people kind of get accustomed to it, and then Pepsi's too sweet and Coke starts winning out. And so, coming back to the cheese example, it makes me wonder, whether you have to also consider like how many samples has the person tried in the day? Is that going to change over time? Are they going to
For
get
sure.
sick of this and like you've got a great batch, but your testers are like they've done like 40 of these samples and they think they're going to think it's garbage.
So, okay, so when you taste sugar, you actually taste sugar for 30 seconds, right? There's actually a curve of intensity versus time, right? So sugar like will go up and then it'll kind of tails off at the end. But if you replace that with artificial sugars, they're actually like a big spike at the start and then they tail off in like 5 seconds. So when you think of flavor and it's like just sweetness, it's intensity over time, right? So if you're making a mac and cheese, you actually can stagger it. And like, I don't know if some people probably know this, but you can stagger it so that you eat each bite like is great, right? Like your first bite is good, but then it tails off and you want more. So you take another bite to get that hit to where it is, right? And there's also things that sometimes there's flavors that just linger on forever and
Yeah.
like it's in your mouth and you don't like it. So maybe like Pepsi, that happens with Pepsi perhaps, right? I don't know, but
Yeah.
the like layering flavors to and that's like a bag of potato chips, right? Like sometimes you can eat the whole bag. That's because you just want to have another chip to hit it to hit your taste buds just right.
I'm not disparaging any brands. I'm just trying to give an example.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
I think what we're talking about here are what maybe an average person would call processed foods, right? Like foods are going
Mm,
through some sort of processing before they get to the store shelf, before they're getting eaten. And I think there's a lot of discussion in popular media and discourse around ultra processed foods are bad for you, but I don't really know. As a layperson. I mean, I'm a scientist, but I'm not a food scientist. What actually is an ultra processed food? Like when does a food stop being a natural food and start being processed or ultra processed? And how do food scientists think about that?
So that's a great question, and it's a new question. I think it's relatively new, and I don't think it's defined yet because I think I've even heard politicians talking about banning ultra processed foods. I don't know what that means.
Mm.
And then because there like is there even a definition? I don't know if we looked at that ahead of time because I know we kind of talked about that. I haven't had a chance to look at that.
No.
But think about like what your mom does in the kitchen, right? So let's say she's making a stew. She puts a piece of meat in the pan ahead of time and she sears it, right? Does
Yeah.
that become processed or ultra processed food? If
Yeah.
she's adding spices to it to make it taste better, that makes it more processed, right? So at what point does it become ultra processed, like your Mas stew versus a cheese powder, right? Maybe a cheese powder, sure, it's ultra processed because it doesn't look like a block of cheddar cheese, right? I think it's interesting of how far do you go between maybe adding flavors, adding colors makes it ultra processed, right? I think there's some questions I have there, and I'm not sure if it's defined yet. Maybe some people have a definition of it, but
Yeah, and one of the things as you're saying that I'm thinking about is processing in terms of the steps that a food goes through versus
yeah,
processing in terms of what is in the food now. And so
sure.
I have no, maybe there is a formal definition, probably not. I mean, a lot of things at the federal level, when you look at it, are really not particularly well defined. I mean, with foods, when I think about the way people talk about ultra processed foods, I often think that what they mean is not necessarily what has been, well, they might mean what has been done to the food. Because there are cases where you might think about, like, if you have complex polysaccharides and glycans and you're breaking them down through heating or through emulsion or whatever, that is impacting the nutritional properties of the food. That's one thing, but I often think they're also talking about things like additives and preservatives and artificial colors, and that those are things people are more concerned about than maybe spices or drying.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, but at what point, when is it an issue? I don't know. I think to me it's a new term. It's easy to say, oh yeah, don't eat ultra processed foods. I think because I see it in a factory, like a lot of things we do, it's not necessarily so different from what your mom does necessarily, like in the kitchen,
Mm. You're
perhaps.
just doing it at a bigger scale.
Yeah, yep.
That's super interesting. I wish we had answers, and maybe maybe it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to define those answers because it probably also depends on if we're talking about additives or we're talking about processing. It's probably not as simple as saying this is okay. This It probably comes down to the individual additives, is what I'm saying. The individual ingredients, the individual processes, and the ingredients that are going into those processes that influence whether something's going to change the nutritional properties of the food in a good or a bad way. And it's such a complex landscape that drawing these
Yeah.
like very broad strokes of ultra processed is bad is probably just too simple way to think about it.
Yeah, it probably goes through like if the FDA was going to set that right, they would probably ask the industry, ask people, like, what do you think is a ultra processed food, and then they'll probably go through that and then say, okay, you can do this, but not that.
Yeah. So that kind of dovetails with nutrition overall. So when you're in a food science environment, you're making food, you're developing new processes for manufacturing foods. What are the discussions that are happening in these companies around nutrition and what's sort of good for people versus just the economic component?
For sure, yeah. So a lot of companies have probably calorie targets, right? They might have protein targets or fat targets. And nutrition means a lot of different things to different people, right? So maybe you want to take out vegetable oils and replace it with dairy fat, right? Or
Hmm.
you want to take out the artificial colors, right? Put natural colors in. Or maybe you want to remove all the colors altogether, right? And all those are probably good, right? And to have like a nutritious food, you don't need everything, but it's all about making like kind of steps to better, right? You
Hmm.
might not be able to get everything right away on the first shot, but maybe you can do one thing, right, and make it more nutritious instead of being perfect right away.
And so I think part of what I'm hearing here is that it's not just driven by cost, right? Because I think maybe like if I was going to play devil's advocate or be a skeptic, I would say all this big food company cares about is how cheaply I can get you this box of cheese and make you still to make it tasty so that you'll buy it. But I think what you're saying is that that's not true. That the companies are considering the nutritional composition of the foods and trying to make that fit within certain parameters.
Yeah, it's good observation. And yeah, there probably are customers of ours that say, make it as cheap as you can, make it taste okay, and then we'll sell that to this market, right?
Yeah.
Where there's other people where, hey, my customers, they want high protein, they want great taste, and they're willing to pay for it, right?
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of different consumers out there too, and different companies that cater to those consumers.
Let's zoom out to 10,000 feet with the experience that you've had. What do you wish that more people knew about food science, our food systems in the United States?
Oh yeah, I think what a lot of people don't realize is like food safety is really important, and I think people take it for granted, even though it's table stakes, right, for being in the food industry,
Mhm.
and maybe thinking about how are you in control of something. So now let's think about something like a potato chip, right? So if you're getting spices, right, spices are grown outside, birds fly above it, birds
Mhm.
poop. how and then if you put the like black pepper, let's say, onto a potato chip, how do you know that that's safe? How do you know there's not salmonella from the black
Mm.
pepper on there, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can actually heat treat spices, right, or that black pepper, to do that log kill step and be all right. But that costs money though,
Hmm.
right? So probably 20 years ago, they're just using probably the cheapest black pepper around, right, to put on there. But now there's actually people thinking, oh, we need to have a kill step. We need to be in control of this process because maybe the chips are fried, right? But the seasoning going on top maybe isn't controlled from a food safety perspective. So I think there's a lot of thinking about, and then like glass, right? You've got to make sure there's no glass in your factory because if something breaks, then
Mm.
you have to recall your food because you can't be certain that there's not glass in there, right? So I think there's a lot of controls in there to make food safe that people just don't even think about, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think and this is a good thing. I never think about that when I'm at the grocery. I mean, I think about food safety sometimes, but like, especially when I think about like meat. But
Mhm.
when when it comes to packaged foods, just the assumption that it's going to be safe. Like the question is usually, is it nutritious or not? Not is it going to be safe for me? Am I going to get salmonella from this bag of potato chips?
See, but you are safe if you're buying it from a grocery store because by now, like all
Yeah.
the companies have sorted that out. But that's something that like a food scientist thinks about a lot that just people don't realize at all that like all the thought and effort that goes into making it safe.
Yeah. That does make sense though. And that there'd be those checks at every step of the way and for all the different ingredients that go into it. And as consumers, we don't think about that. We think about how much it costs. Right. And that's probably what
Yeah.
makes it difficult, I think, for you guys to try to make it safe and keep it affordable for people.
Yeah, because all that adds up, right? Like if you're heat treating all these things, that's add another couple pennies to it, right,
Mm.
in the long run. And
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about sort of food systems in the United States? Like I'm imagining these like networks of all these ingredients moving between different companies that result in a final product. And maybe all that's happening behind the scenes and we don't even think about it.
oh, it's happening, yeah. And even like preserving your intellectual property, right? Your IP.
Uh-huh.
So you might be buying flavor from a flavor company and hardly nobody knows it goes in that. And then it comes to your factory and that's like the magic ingredient to make your ingredient taste fantastic, right? So there's a lot of when I say secrets, it's kind of controlling information, right? That gets
Right.
out. So there's actually a lot of like kind of layering of different ingredients sometimes.
How do you
And
balance this is something I've always wondered about. Like you hear about like they're like, okay, so there's this famous story that the recipe for Coca-Cola is only known by like three people and that they never fly on the same flights at the same time because if it crashed, we want to preserve it. And that they've never patented it for that reason. Maybe I don't even know if that's true. But
it is.
there are requirements for labeling foods and what's in them. So how do you balance labeling and transparency there with maintaining your trade secrets around your different formulas or your ingredients?
Great question. And there's a lot that goes into it. So when you're like Coke or whatever example, Pepsi, natural flavors, like you can put all kinds of things in a natural flavor and it kind of preserves that intellectual property, right? Spices, if you label spices, you don't really know what all spices are in there.
Mm.
There's certain things that have to be called out, right? I think black pepper and garlic are two of them. So if you put black pepper, garlic in something, you have to label that. But if you put cumin or paprika, maybe paprika could be a color, so I think that might have to be labeled. And there's different labeling between FDA and USDA too. So apologies if I'm not an expert in all these, but
Mhm.
there's it's not the most specific regulations in the world, right?
Okay, so my last major question. What do you see as like the trends or the changes that are happening in food science that people ought to be aware of?
Yeah, so I think we're kind of in, I want to say a bit of a transition period. So I think yesterday people are really concerned about nutrition, right? And nutrition will always be important, but I think people every day are paying attention more and more to nutrition, right? Um, for whatever that means. You ask 100 different people, what does good nutrition mean? You'll get 100 different answers probably, right? But, high protein, right? With the GLP-1 now, it's more, I don't know, kind of smaller servings, maybe more impactful
Mm.
in ingredients or whatever, right?
This rings true to me because I was at a healthy longevity conference in Pasadena a couple of years ago, and all they were talking about and there were a lot of reps from food companies. Everything they were talking about was related to GLP-1s. And one of the studies that was being presented on, it came from Walmart. The idea being that Walmart's a big chain, right? So they get however many millions of customers. but they both sell food and they have a pharmacy. And so they have a set of customers where they can link the GLP-1 with the food purchases and found that, and this is maybe going to sound super obvious, people who were on GLP-1s just bought less food. And so people who were the reps from the food industry who were at this conference were panicking. They were like, our margins cannot
That's a big
support
deal.
a 2 to 3% drop in people not buying food anymore. And so I'm wondering how that's impacting the inside of development.
It totally did. Yeah, absolutely. People are buying less food now because of GLP-1, and that was a concern, and it still is a concern. But people are still paying money for food though, right? So maybe they're buying less food, but maybe they're paying the same amount too, right? Because
Mm,
they're getting paying for indulgence more, perhaps, right? So I think it's maybe it's less food, but maybe it's better food.
mhm.
Like there's different ways
That would
to,
be a nice way to think about it. Less
yeah,
food, but more high quality, nutritious food. And
exactly.
the other thought I had about your point about what is nutrition is that this is sort of like tangential to the world that I live in. Physicians or medical doctors, MDs, they actually get very little training on nutrition. They get like 10 hours or something in the course of their whole training on nutrition. But you think about how fundamental nutrition is to all of everything that really pertains to our health. It's a little bit wild.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, and like even old school grandmas have like eat this food for that, and this like all these home remedies, right? Which
Mhm.
maybe there's not scientific evidence, but man, I know some people that think, yeah, this works, even though it's not proven, maybe in the scientific community, right?
Well, there's a cultural component. Well, okay. I'm going to go off the rails here a little bit,
Go
but
for it.
there's a couple things here that I want to say. My experience with doctors is that they also have very strong beliefs about nutrition and what is and isn't good for you. And not all of it, a lot of it is based on their personal experience with patients, which can be anecdotal and not necessarily scientifically based. And so that can be difficult when you're speaking with them to change their mind about things.
Yeah, so I think nutrition is a big trend. I think the one that's coming, and it's already here, right? But it's going to grow and grow is sustainability. Sustainability is very important, and a lot of unsustainable things come from the food, from consuming food, right? And and related to that, the SEC, right? So if you're on the stock exchange in the US, they have to report on sustainability and climate action,
Mm,
so like as of 2024. Food companies are going to have to report on how sustainable they are, and if they're not already doing it. So some companies are really good at it, of course, right? That they're all about that. Some companies haven't
mhm.
even thought about it yet, probably, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of solutions in there for sustainability so that they can report on it. And I think they have to even hit certain metrics to get even like financing from banks. Like
Mhm.
some banks won't invest in companies if they're not sustainable or can't show
And how
climate.
sustainability here defined? Is it like some sort of carbon footprint
Yeah, like
metric?
that's a lot of it. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. Like it's kind of new and coming, but yeah, it's like the carbon footprint. In
Mhm.
dairy, right? Like dairy has a lot of sustainability.
Yeah.
I don't want to say issues, but things to get through, right? Like
Mhm.
they got their work cut out for them.
Is it because of with dairy? Is it because of like methane from cows, or is it like
Yeah,
the agricultural inputs?
it's those farting cows, man.
Is it farts or burps? I never know.
I don't know.
Maybe it's
Yeah,
both. Who knows?
yeah,
You got all those five
and
stomachs.
exactly. So like I think that's a really big deal that we laugh about, but I mean, from a
Mhm.
climate change perspective, it's you got
Oh
to
yeah,
sort it
it's
out.
absolutely real. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bigger discussion here about I think how that relates with with economic situation. I think we're in a place right now in the United States where a lot of people are really struggling, and so they're thinking about how am I going to make my next paycheck? How am I going to feed my family? Not so much
Yeah.
how is this going to be sustainable for the future? And that is a bad place for us to be in. So it's reassuring that there still exists some level of regulations around forcing companies to be accountable for that, so that average people don't have to be in the streets picketing and making sure that sustainability is going to happen.
Yeah, but sustainability doesn't also have to be bad either, right? It could actually you can make money off of sustainability too if you do it right, right?
Yeah.
Like reusing things or not throwing things away, for
Mhm.
instance, right? And making things more efficient. You're being more sustainable and you're making money on it too. So there's places to win both ways there.
Well, Bame, thank you so much for doing this. And we could probably keep going on for another 3 hours if you wanted to, but I really appreciate your perspective. And it's always so fun to keep up with your content, but also to hear the other sides of the things that you know about and share that with people. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Mark, you asked some really good questions, by the way. I was impressed. And I think that's one of the things I respect the most about people are people that ask good questions and things that we can talk about. So you're a great interview. I appreciate it. And I think I enlightened you on a few things today. So I think that's good. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and I'm gonna go buy some cheese powder and think of you.
yes, that's
So,
awesome. Thank you.
all right, thanks, thanks a lot,
Yeah,
and
thanks, man.
thanks everybody
Yeah,
for watching. I hope you have a great day.
yep. Bye.